the state of our nervous system is the lens through which we experience life. So it impacts literally everything. For me, a good life is a life in which you can show up intentionally. You live according to your values and your virtues, and you show up as the person that you aspire to be, that kind of your future self would be proud of. And what I realized is that in so many occasions, our nervous system can get hijacked, basically. We enter these reactive states, we become defensive, and we lose optionality and choice and agency over how we can show up.
Jonny Miller is a public speaker, entrepreneur, and the creator of Nervous System Mastery, a 5-week training that's helped over 1,000 people become less reactive and more intentional. After losing his fiancée, Jonny rebuilt his life from the inside out. Freediving, meditation, psychedelics, breathwork, distilling what actually regulates state and returns choice. His core idea? Your nervous system is the lens you live through. Master it, and you can change everything. Subscribe if you want your vagus nerve to send you a thank you note and your amygdala to stop doom scrolling your life.
When you first get into freezing water, you tense up and you contract and you get me out of here. But if you stay with it, your body kind of relaxes and you learn to let it in. You learn to kind of welcome it. And the same is ultimately true of grief. In the beginning, it feels like too much to let in. It feels like it's going to overwhelm you. And I found the more that I was able to not try and tense against it and resist, but just allow it to move through me, the easier it was. And ultimately, I had moments where I was bawling my eyes out and grieving, but the felt sense experience was, I feel love and I feel connection and I feel aliveness. It almost broke my brain a little bit, because I was but grieving is meant to be so hard. It's like a negative emotion. It's a bad thing. But here I am having this experience that is, borderline ecstatic. And it's like what I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so it really, it got me to think that okay, I really don't understand emotions the way that I thought I did. My journey then went into freediving, meditation, psychedelics, and then ultimately breathwork. And it was a combination of trainings that really focused on the nervous system and the role of the nervous system and how regulation works, where I was I get it. This is so important and useful, and I wish I'd known this many years ago. I wish I was taught this as a kid.
Jonny Miller. Why on earth should someone try and master their nervous system?
Great question. Why would someone want to do that?
People are busy. They got stuff to do.
Yeah, people are busy. Well, the frame that has stuck with me for a while is this idea that the state of our nervous system is the lens through which we experience life. So it impacts literally everything. And, a practical example, the state that you're in, it impacts the types of conversations you have, how grounded you are, even kind of the opportunities and the things that you notice. It really does impact everything. And, for myself, I studied philosophy at university, and I was very interested for a long time, still am, in this question of, what does it mean to live a good life? That's kind of what I think about all the time. and for me, a good life is a life in which you can show up intentionally. You live according to your values and your virtues, and you show up as the person that you aspire to be, that kind of your future self would be proud of. And what I realized is that in so many occasions, our nervous system can get hijacked, basically. We enter these reactive states. I can kind of go into more detail about what those are. But in those reactive states, we become defensive and we lose optionality and choice and agency over how we can show up. And we become more reactive, basically. And that can be reactive. You say things you don't mean, but it can also be scrolling on Instagram for 2 hours and then being where the fuck did my time go?
Yeah.
And so I really think that the nervous system is a very underrated piece of the equation in terms of what it means to live a good life. And that there are a set of skills that you can learn to be more grounded and regulated and ultimately have more agency in your life.
Good answer, man. Of course, with the central topic of my podcast being brain and biology science, of course, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe paint the picture of someone whose nervous system is just completely in chaos. The bottom end of the spectrum in which you really don't want to spend a lot of time in, but I suspect that we all dip our toes in every now and again.
Yeah. So I created a video a while back. I was obsessed with video games as a kid. And you know, if you ever play Zelda or like an RPG, when your heart meter goes down to like 2 out of 10 or something, the screen starts flashing red, and everything kind of that's to me kind of like what it's like. So there's two modes of reactivity that are the ways the nervous system, like adaptive responses that the nervous system has to protect itself. One of them, which a lot of people can relate to, is anxiety, overwhelm, kind of too much energy in the system and not enough capacity to be with that. So that presents as anxiety or rumination, looping thoughts, struggling with sleep. Over time, if that builds up, then that will create exhaustion, allostatic load, things like that. And then the other form of reactivity is known as hypoarousal, and that presents as collapse, depression, lack of energy, kind of inability to motivate yourself, focus, things like that. So really these kind of like two forms of reactivity that the nervous system has.
You mentioned a phrase there, allosteric load. That might be worth defining.
Yeah, it basically is wear or tear on the body. That is as a result of being in a chronic state of sympathetic overwhelm or fight flight kind of for a long period of time without that downshift and without the recovery.
Could you draw a through line between how, like you mentioned agency. Agency is a question that I've been really interested in for a while. Why is it that some people seem to be able to live the lives that they want and some people just can't, don't, won't? How does having a very well balanced and regulated nervous system impact something like agency?
Well, I know you interviewed Dr. Michael Levin as well, and he has some really interesting thoughts on agency that are slightly a different tangent. But in terms of how regulation impacts agency, yeah, it's such a good question. And what's the best way to go here? Sorry, my dog's just been like licking my feet. I'm like distracted here. Yeah, okay. So one of the key ways, I think, is that when you approach what's known as the edge of your capacity or your window of tolerance, let's, maybe use like public speaking as an example, which I learned recently is people are more afraid of public speaking than death. Death is like the number 2 fear. Public speaking is the number 1, which I find hilarious. But once you learn what's known as bottom-up practices for regulating your nervous system, there's a way in which you suddenly have more confidence in yourself because you know that if you go into a stressful situation, maybe it's even just like a social event or a party, that you are very quickly and efficiently able to down-regulate, to kind of downshift your nervous system back into a place of grounded calm. So you stop being afraid of putting yourself in situations that might potentially be challenging. And so, I mean, this is maybe more of like, it increases self-confidence, but I think that is also a piece of agency as well. And then I think the second thing is, over time, one working definition for nervous system mastery that I have is that it decreases the half-life of reactivity. So what I mean by that is I still get reactive to stuff. I still get triggered. Shit happens. Like literally this morning, my car battery ran out of battery at like 7 a.m. I was like miles away. I had to get a tuk-tuk like back here on these dirt roads. And I was like, this sucks.
Sounds like an upgrade. I love those tuk-tuks.
Tuk-tuks are fun, but like 7 in the morning on busy roads, I wasn't in the mood for it. But the point is that, or maybe a better example would be like after an argument, or let's say someone sends you a shitty email, whatever it is. Some people would spend, 2 days, even like 2 weeks or 2 months like ruminating or impacted by whatever that thing is. And once you learn some of these skills of nervous system mastery that I can kind of unpack, then that half-life goes from being like 2 days to 2 hours to like 2 minutes and maybe even like 2 seconds.
Right.
And that vastly increases your quality of life to the point where you don't really have like bad days. Like you might have something bad might happen, but it won't stay with you. You kind of come back to baseline and you feel through whatever the emotion is, and then you feel joy again. And so I think, I mean, resilience is maybe another way to put it as well. But that just means that you can spend more time in that space of intentionality and agency as opposed to in a place where you're like contracted and like life sucks.
Very nice. I was going to ask you, I think the half-life of reactivity is just a really nice phrase. And I think everyone quite quickly can gain an idea of what that is. And it's something that everyone wants to improve. Mm-hmm. We'll definitely get into all of the practices and protocols that you've developed throughout your time. But I'm really curious to go first, maybe, what life event or inflection point or story happened that has set you on the trajectory that you're on now? Why is this your mission? Why do you feel a calling to do this?
Yeah. There's a couple. One of them was, so I ran a startup when I was in my 20s, went through burnout, and the burnout happened largely because I was completely disconnected from my body. I was just, working very long hours, wasn't treating myself very well, wasn't sleeping great, and had this kind of existential life crisis. But then the real thing that sent me into researching the nervous system in particular was my former fiancée, Sophie, had been diagnosed with bipolar. And in 2017, we were traveling. She came back home. She went back to work as a junior doctor, had an anxiety attack at work, and then came back and overdosed on her own medication and took her own life ultimately. And that completely, just threw my life upside down. It kind of like obliterated everything I thought about my future, about, having kids together, and was in many ways still is by far the hardest thing I've ever been through. But what was...
I'm so sorry, man. Fuck. I'm so sorry. That's horrible. No one should go through that. I'm so sorry.
And I mean, and it's like, it's tragically increasingly common as well. Just the number of people taking their own life around the world, especially in the medical system, which is really messed up. Like these are the people that are meant to be the healthiest and supporting us. But, the process of learning how to grieve was ultimately what I think has changed my life completely. In many ways, I feel like a different person today than who I was before this grieving process. And I think part of this was, so I realized, or I had the thought fairly early on that I generally wasn't very in touch with my emotions. Like I mentioned, I'd burnt out previously, and more importantly, I'd met other people, adults who were older than me, who'd lost someone close to them, but then hadn't really grieved. And there was this kind of like deadness or like cynicism and like lack of aliveness that I saw in them. And I was terrified of becoming that older person that was just like a husk of a human being.
Right.
And so I kind of went full tilt into the opposite direction in terms of like, okay, how do I like learn to feel this? Basically, that was kind of the question. And a number of things helped. And I realize more recently the common thread is unclenching, but I can come back to that later.
Something that always strikes me when I talk to neuroscientists is just how staggeringly complex the brain really is. It's this incredible prediction engine, always trying to make sense of the world and keep us safe. But it's important to remember we're still running ape hardware. Our brains weren't even remotely built for the chaos of modern life. And sometimes they just get scrambled. I've recently had some difficulty in my own personal life, and I realized that it was about time my own ape prediction system got the gym workout and just rebalancing that it's probably needed for quite a long time. So I booked my first therapy session with BetterHelp, who I'm incredibly excited to be partnering with on this video. A massive umbrella review of hundreds of randomized control trials found that nearly every meta-analysis of psychotherapy favored it over control conditions. In other words, mental health professionals from decades of research consistently find that talking therapies do actually work. BetterHelp is an entirely online therapy platform designed to make that process incredibly simple. You can connect with a licensed therapist from your home on your schedule through video, audio, or even text with literally no fuss at all. What I like about it is that you can switch therapists at any time until you find someone who you personally can build rapport with and open up to, which is such a critical part of therapy, at no extra cost. If you've ever thought about trying therapy, or you're just feeling a little bit stuck in your own head lately like I was, this might be a great first step that I really couldn't recommend more. Visit betterhelp.com/giantshoulder to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp/giantshoulder, and in doing so, you also support the channel. Links are down below, because sometimes the most powerful way to understand your own brain is just to talk about it.
But essentially, I started swimming in the ocean in the freezing water. And there's something about, when you first get into freezing water, you like tense up and you contract and you like, get me out of here. But if you stay with it, your body kind of relaxes and you learn to let it in. You learn to kind of welcome it. And the same is ultimately true of grief, like especially grief at that level, but really grief on any level. In the beginning, it feels like too much to let in. It feels like it's going to overwhelm you. And there really is this journey of increasing degrees, just like one little step at a time of surrender. It kind of comes in waves. And I found the more that I was able to not try and tense against it and resist, but just allow it to move through me, the easier it was. And ultimately, I had moments where I was I was like bawling my eyes out and grieving, but the felt sense experience was, I feel love and I feel connection and I feel aliveness. And if,
Yes.
I had this story, it almost like broke my brain a little bit, because I was like, but grieving is meant to be so hard. It's like a negative emotion. It's like, it's a bad thing. But here I am having this experience that is, borderline ecstatic. And it's like, what the fuck is going on? And so it really, it got me to think that like, okay, I really don't understand emotions the way that I thought I did. And
Right.
so, my journey then went into freediving, meditation, psychedelics, and then ultimately breathwork. And it was a combination of trainings that really focused on the nervous system and the role of the nervous system and how regulation works, where I was like, I get it. Like this is so important and useful. And I wish I'd known this many years ago. I wish I was taught this as a kid. And that kind of, became the origin, I guess, of nervous system mastery and the work that I do today.
So well said, man. What a powerful story. You bring up such a good point about the medical system and how there's a tragically high number of people in those fields. And it's tragically ironic that there are people who are supposed to teach us about health and treat our health, but then they're made work 24-hour shifts. So there's no 0% chance their nervous system is going to be even remotely regulated. And then that definitely edges that statistic in the direction that nobody wants it. And that's it's why I think all of the doctors in Ireland are going to Australia, and I think it's probably the same in the UK. Is that all the doctors are going to Australia is because they can make the same amount of money and oftentimes a little bit more, but they can work 9 to 5s. Like how we still live in this world where medical doctors are working 24-hour shifts and then are expected to make good decisions, not just for themselves, for other people, is a bit insane. Like, is that not completely ridiculous?
Yeah, it's absurd. And it's not just that. It's like the shitty LED overhead lights that are in hospitals, the terrible food that they're fed, the lack of education around maybe emotional well-being and how to take care of themselves. Everything is kind of very medicalized, and it doesn't take in kind of like the whole human being. into
Yes.
account. And I think maybe things are beginning to change slightly, but honestly, there's just still such a long way to go. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it's a really bad situation.
I resonate a lot with your startup burnout story, because I actually, straight out of college, started my own startup. It was a language learning company,
Oh,
grew
cool.
up for like 4 years. And we just got to this fundraising stage where we needed money. Finances were never, ever secured. So stress was always
Hmm.
high.
Hmm.
I was pitching to investor after investor, getting rejected like 50 times a week. There'd be days with just investor calls back to back.
Yeah.
It was so brutal. Eventually, I just completely burned out. I didn't have any, I think, singularly big blow up, or it wasn't like a dramatic thing. It was just a realization of, my God, I am run down completely here.
Hmm.
And I don't think I had very good introspection on that myself. Everyone around me was kind of telling me, maybe take a bit of time off. Like, you've been working really hard for a long time. Nobody can just get kicked in the balls as many times as you're getting kicked in the balls by investors week after week, day after day, and just keep going. But I didn't have that exposure myself.
Mm.
How do you think someone builds that level of introspection where they can see their own nervous system going into dysregulation? Because
Hmm.
it isn't always dramatic, right? Like, my sleep was always okay.
Hmm.
Like, everything was okay. Everything I thought was in balance, but it just turned out that it wasn't. And then kind of
Hmm.
woke up one week and was like, I'm done with this. Like,
Hmm.
I
Right.
can't get kicked in the balls by any more investors this week. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this. Well, firstly, that moment is often often what happens is someone will go in that kind of sympathetic overdrive to a point where they reach the edge of their capacity, and then it's like a fuse switches, and they drop down into the hypoarousal, which is the kind of collapse shutdown state, and that's when they're like, "Oh shit! Like I'm fried. Something needs to change." Um, the the analogy or the frame that I have that I think is helpful is this idea of feather brick dump truck, and that our body is constantly giving us feedback the whole time. And if something is out of alignment in some way, it in the beginning it'll like tickle us with a feather. It's like, hey, like pay attention to this thing. If we don't listen, then it's like it throws a brick at you. Maybe you wake up and you're like, I feel pretty exhausted today, but you ignore that. And then if that doesn't work, then there's some kind of dump truck that can be like a full blown health crisis. Maybe it manifests as like you get fired from your job, or relationship blows up, something like that. And that's unfortunately the point where most people begin to pay attention, because they're humbled by life. They've kind of brought to their knees in some way, and they're like, okay, the mental models that I had, or the way that I've been orienting is not working, so I need to change something. But there is another alternative, which is kind of learning to attune to and to listen to your body, to your interoceptive signals that are coming, huge amounts of data in every moment that your body is telling you what's going on. And so learning to listen to that is really a key skill. And then I'll just kind of, I might as well share the other two skills and pieces here. One is self-regulation, or the second is self-regulation, and that is becoming skilled at downshifting after a stressful day. So let's say that you've just done back-to-back calls with investors. Not inherently a bad thing, but if you go straight from doing that to like trying to fall asleep without some kind of downshift ritual or routine, or stretching, or walking in nature, whatever you can do to relax, doing some breath work maybe, it's going to impact your sleep. You're going to wake up tired, and it's just going to compound over many days. And then the third part of this, which is maybe the most important part, is emotional fluidity. And I think there's this very helpful concept of emotional debt. So same way you can build up credit card debt and then you default, you can build up emotional debt and then you have burnout. And
For sure.
in your case, I would imagine that constantly receiving rejection after rejection after rejection, it would have been challenging to actually this sounds odd, but like welcome and allow that rejection to kind of land and move through, as opposed to kind of like stuff it down and like pretend it didn't happen, or just ignore it and move on to the next thing. And I would imagine that like that, if that mountain of rejection built up over time without it being metabolized, it would probably create a lot of stress in your system, which would compound any burnout tendencies that you had in that moment. So having practices to not only introspect, but to kind of feel into your body and allow any of those emotions to move and be expressed, so they don't get kind of lodged in the nervous system for later.
Yes. Yeah, really good point. I've definitely learned that you pay compound interest on unresolved anything, unresolved emotions, unresolved hard conversations, anything that's unresolved, you pay compound interest, and that interest continues to compound exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely overusing cannabis in that time as well, smoking almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was, again, sort of blunting that. Like, I was either calling an investor or high for like a good while. And like, that's probably not that healthy, right? Either in a really high stress environment, or just, getting stoned to maybe really process and deal with that. It can be very hard to know what experiences to dwell on and what experiences to truck on through, right? Because I remember I read this, there's a great science communicator called Nicholas Fabiano on X, and people should follow his threads. He's really good. He posted this study and breakdown on something that said people who dwelled on their emotions had worse outcomes, had worse negative psychological outcomes, and that people that kind of trucked on through to a certain extent, and I don't want to misrepresent what's being said here, had better outcomes. So there's a certain amount of kind of trucking through that's required, and a certain amount of dwelling. And it's kind of being able to know when is the right situation for it, which, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I would have a different take. I respect his Twitter account as well. My sense is neither trucking through or dwelling are necessarily helpful, frankly.
Okay.
There are certain scenarios. Let's say if you're in an investor meeting, it might not be good, like appropriate timing to actually like feel the heartbreak of being said no to in that moment. Like that might not be appropriate, or might just be challenging. But I would replace. So I guess what I'm saying is it is a very useful feature of the human nervous system and of our biology that we are able to temporarily buffer our emotional responses for later. Like it's essential, and it's really fortunate that we can do that. But it's interesting. I saw this with we had a friend stayed for the last couple of weeks, and they have a baby, and we noticed that like there were times where the baby would kind of like start crying, and then sometimes the mom and dad would like kind of get it to kind of calm down, but then the crying would resume later. It's almost like it gets buffered temporarily, but then it kind of comes back later on. And so instead of dwelling, I would replace that with kind of courageous curiosity is maybe the best frame that I have, where you're
coping.
And even coping is the right word. It's more like actually, this sounds weird, but like welcoming, loving, and even enjoying it, which is like, it's a lot if it's around something like rejection or something like that. But there is a way in which it begins with just being curious about the feeling or the sensation, but then there's a way in which the feeling can be welcomed and it actually feels good. And there's a sense of like freedom and expansiveness on the other side. So that's the move that, and so much of the mainstream self-help world is around like, how do I manage my emotions? How do I just like get through the day so my emotions don't like fuck up whatever it is that I'm trying to do? But actually, I think that's, in my experience, it's misguided, and that the real benefits and the real skill is learning how to welcome all of the emotions without an agenda, without trying to fix it, without trying to get rid of it, or without feeling it so it will go away.
Right.
And that is, it's tricky. But I mean, another, maybe this will help land it for listeners. But if you imagine, let's say like a 5-year-old kid who kind of comes in and maybe he's crying a bit, or maybe he's having a bit of a tantrum, Like you wouldn't, I mean, maybe some parents would try and manage him, but really what you want to do is just like give him a hug and be like, it's okay. Like, I'm sorry that you're having a bad time. Like, it's okay. Like, I've got you. We're good. And that's kind of the move you want to make with yourself. And when parts of you get triggered or get angry or feel rejected or feel helpless or insert emotion there, that is the skill to cultivate. And it's a completely different orientation to how 99% of people orient towards themselves.
For sure. Let's try and break that down practically. So I open my email.
Mm-hmm.
I see, you're great. We loved you, but we're going to have to pass some format of the same rejection.
Yeah.
I go deep sigh. All of those memories that I had created in my mind of securing this funding and being financially secure, that dream is squished under hydraulic press. What do I do then? I'm staring at this rejection email.
Yep.
Like my standard process was always, okay, next one, get back to work right away. 10 seconds later, I'm doing whatever the 73rd item on my 1,000 item to-do list is to do. But what do you think I should have done when I'm looking at that rejection email? How do I process that in its entirety?
Yeah, beautiful question. So, this could happen in a couple of minutes, maybe even less. But essentially, I'm guessing, and tell me if this is the case, that like initially when it lands, the first response might be, well, the first thing to do would be like just to drop in, kind of check in with your body and be like, okay, like what am I actually noticing here? My guess is that there would be some form of heartbreak, like a miniature heartbreak of like, I really hope this was going to work out. Like I had such high expectations. I'm like, oh crap, like it didn't work out. And so just like feeling that heartbreak, and often that comes with an unclenching move. Like actually you kind of notice that the unfelt heartbreak has some kind of tightness or clenching associated with it in the body. And so noticing where there probably is tension, like just after you've read that email, and just like allowing that to like soften and loosen a little bit. Kind of like if you're about to get into freezing cold water, your body will brace and tense against the cold water. But there's a way that you can just like relax that tension and just like soften. It's kind of the same thing. And then once you've felt through that, maybe there'd be another check-in, and maybe just guessing here, but maybe there's like some fear around, oh, like, well, what if the next 5 investors say no as well? And what if I'm close to running out of money? And so then it's kind of like, okay, like notice that fear, like welcome it, like soften the resistance to feeling the fear. It's like, okay, there's like fear here as well. Okay, great. Like now I can get back to kind of doing these emails. Like it can be super simple. And obviously this happens on a spectrum. So it can be as simple as like, it happens in a few seconds, to I will guide people through breathwork journeys, often one-on-one, where these emotional processes, what I think of as like the nervous system unlatching or unwinding, where the body will recreate the same position that it was in when, this is in more extreme things. Like I've worked with someone who almost drowned, or people who've been in like a car accident or were left alone for a long period, like more intense things. And in those cases, sometimes it might be 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes where the body is like moving around, expressing, letting out emotion, things like that. So it's, there's really a spectrum.
Yes.
But the key thing is actually trusting that the body kind of knows what to do, and just like unclenching, frankly.
Do you think that there's a slippery slope toward, I completely understand what you mean, but I'm curious on this. Can you welcome fear too much to the point that it turns into an anxiety attack, or something uncontrollable? Can you be too open to the experience where you're kind of letting it come at you too much, if you get what I mean? You open the floodgates too much, and you actually can't handle what's coming at you.
Yeah, so that's a common fear that a lot of people have, that actually leads to, in my opinion, more resistance to it, because it's like, well, if I let this in, it's like opening up Pandora's box. Like I'm going to cry for days. It's never going to end. It's a really good question. Let's see, what comes to mind here? Can I let in fear too much? I'm just thinking of, I went like surfing yesterday, and the waves were like 10, 12 foot waves, and I was terrified. um, so you mentioned like, what if I feel anxious? So another kind of controversial take that I have is that I don't think anxiety is an emotion. It is a protective response against an underlying emotion. So even the word anxiety, it's derived from the Latin ango, which means to constrict. So anxiety is really a constricting against an underlying emotion. So if anxiety is coming up, it's because there is constriction against the fear that might be underneath. And so again, the move there is to welcome that and kind of soften into that. And at the same time, I will say that, particularly if someone has been through something super intense, I think of like maybe war veterans are a good example. If they start reliving some of those experiences or memories, then their system might shut down. It would be too intense for their system to handle. They'd be outside of their capacity, outside of their window of tolerance, and they would, like in many cases, likely just shut down again. So in those cases, that is where the skill of embodied safety, both safety externally and safety internally. So external safety might be a kind of low stimulus environment, soft lighting, maybe some relaxing music, basically kind of like, let me backtrack a bit. Your body is constantly tracking for safety cues. And so the more safety cues you can send it, the higher your capacity to feel whatever this thing is without it shutting down will be. And so this is where, for extreme things like that, working with a one-on-one psychotherapist, or the MAPS MDMA trials, for example.
I was going to say MDMA also helps in these scenarios.
Absolutely. So the way, like the mental model that I have is working with a somatic therapist they're almost loaning you nervous system capacity. Like they're co-regulating with you, which gives you more ability to be with the thing that might be too much to be with when you're just on your own. And the same with the MDMA, like it floods your system with serotonin, which is a ton of safety cues. And the body's like, okay, I can remember and feel this stuff without getting shut down. That's, I think, a big part of why it's been so effective in these trials.
For sure. How do our social relationships help us regulate our nervous system?
They are, I think, essential. And I think that the quality of your relationships is a great mirror to how regulated or dysregulated your system is. And a diminishing circle of deep friendships is probably just not a great signal for nervous system health in general. I think that, there was a study that like loneliness is considered to be as bad as smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day for your health. So it can really, like, relationships are interesting because they both mirror the parts of ourselves that we're not comfortable feeling and trigger us, especially intimate relationships like girlfriends, boyfriends, marriages. Like that is really where our deepest stuff surfaces. It's where the reactivity often happens the most. And at the same time, relationships can create safety and allow us to feel seen and allow us to, particularly if we feel shame around something, like if we have a friend and you share whatever the thing is you feel shameful about, and they don't judge you, but they're like, oh man, that must have been really hard. Like, thanks for sharing, mate. You'll feel so much better.
Yes.
So I think, relationships are just so important. And they're not really prioritized or even valued as much, I feel like, in our society today. And a lot of them are just digital, which is, nice because you can stay in touch with more people. But our nervous systems were wired for in-person connection, and we're picking up on visual cues. What we're doing right now with like video and audio is definitely better. Like we can, even the sound of our voices, our system is kind of picking up on cues. There's a huge amount of information that's communicated through the tone of voice that is then your subconscious is calculating, like, okay, how safe do I feel based on his tone of voice, based on these kind of micro muscles in his face, etc. Like there's a huge amount of data that's coming in from that.
For sure. I think in those studies as well, what's come up is that it's far more related to the quality of the social relationships than the quantity, right? So
Totally.
we may have
Hmm.
1,000 followers on Instagram, but it means almost nothing to our nervous system regulation.
Hmm.
There's also an interesting aspect of your perception of your loneliness
Mm.
rather over absolute loneliness. I
Hmm.
think it's, some people can have this strong perception of their loneliness, even though they are surrounded by people, and those people might even be quite, good, and they might be, beneficial, but it's kind of, there's a perceptual barrier there rather than
Hmm.
absolute loneliness. Would you say that's true as well?
100%. I mean, you can be lonely in a crowd, and you can be, a monk doing a year of solitude and feel deeply connected.
Right.
It's definitely an internal perception. I mean, loneliness, I think, is a sense of like longing for connection. And so if you have people around you, but you're not feeling connection, then the better question is, okay, in what ways am I constructing barriers against connection from other people? In what
Right.
ways does connection maybe not feel safe? Or maybe in what ways am I just not around people that I resonate with? So it's more of, there's a lot of self-inquiry that can happen there.
Yes. So let's go into now some of the practices that you've developed where you've seen really good results. Like what are the patterns in the people that go through nervous system mastery where they've gone from a place of, say, highly dysregulated chaos to, very well regulated nervous system, overall more balanced, better
Mm.
psychology in general?
Yeah. So I'll give a few. Um, so I teach the skills that I mentioned kind of sequentially. So starting off with interoceptive practices to build that somatic awareness, because without that, you're not really able to even tell the difference if other practices are doing anything, if you're not really listening and tuned in. The second set are these bottom up protocols for downshifting, down regulating, calming. A lot of them using the breath, humming, things like that. And then the third category is the more emotional practices, like somatic surfing is one. They draw from somatic experiencing, Hakomi, and other more like therapeutic modalities. Um, but in terms of kind of what I've seen in students, so the two things come to mind as being incredibly helpful. One of them is the practice of NSDR or Yoga Nidra, which I certainly didn't invent, but it's incredibly beneficial for a number of reasons. Basically, it's like you can think of it as like um, a supercharged power nap, and you're basically doing a guided body scan for anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes, and you're tracking points around your body. And this not only builds interoception, but it's deeply relaxing. And for a lot of people particularly people that come to my course, they struggle with switching off, or they, as you mentioned earlier, they rely on cannabis or alcohol or substances in order to be able to relax. And so training your system to downshift on its own without these defensive accommodations is the term in the literature, but basically kind of like external substances. That is a huge piece. And, you also flush stress hormones and your kind of blood chemistry resets. So just doing that for 10, 15 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week, that alone has a pretty big difference because you're also building the interoception as well as learning how to downshift. Um,
And is
and
that guided, or do people do that by themselves? Is there a thing online for a guided NSDR? What do
yeah,
you generally recommend?
I've recorded a couple myself that I can share, and then there's also people can search Ali Boothroyd on YouTube, and her guided stuff is free and it's brilliant.
I'll link them all below. Sweet.
Great, yeah. YouTube Premium is better because there's no ads. Ads are really annoying if you're if you're listening
Yes.
halfway through and there's like a TikTok ad or something. Um,
Yes.
so NSDR is super helpful, and then I think the other thing that comes to mind is um, we've created a format that I think of as like a training arena for practicing these skills in relationship. We call it the Relational Dojo, and it's basically a gym for doing some of these practices in connection with someone else, and revealing your experience and what's coming up for you in real time. And I think that's actually a really critical part of the training as well, because it teaches you to develop these skills whilst you're also communicating with someone else.
Very cool. So, something I'm doing at the moment that you might find interesting. Have you ever heard of descriptive experience sampling?
No.
So this was a method created in the 1950s by this guy, Dr. Russell Herbert. And I've been working with him now for the last 8 weeks. Basically, I carry around this box
Okay.
and I turn it on for like 6 to 7 hours per week. And it beeps me at random times. And then I write down my inner experience in that moment. So the idea is that as it goes on, you gain some idea of how much am I inner speaking? What's my sensory awareness? What interoceptive signals am I aware of? What am I not aware of at all? In what kind of ways do I think? Do I tend to think about these types of things? Do I tend to think about these types? There's lots of things that you can discover. And I think one of the biggest findings that episode is going to be out of my whole journey in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited for that. It's been a fun process. But one of the main findings is just how poor people have in terms of understanding their own interoception and inner experience. Like people really have no idea what's going on inside them unless they really take the time to learn and practice. Like we live in such a distracted world that if you're at the bus stop for 10 minutes, like you're watching TikTok for 10 minutes, like you don't spend any of that time just focusing on how your legs feel, how your arms feel, just trying to really understand that interoceptive signals. It probably took me 2 to 3 weeks before Russ, who's been doing this for 50 years, this method for 50 years, yeah, to be like, okay, now I think you're actually getting at your inner experience. Before you were kind of like just describing what you were doing, like I was working, but now I'm able to really get at that experience. But I just find it so interesting that we really live in such a distracted world. We have no idea what's going on inside. Have you found that similar vein in your interoceptive teachings?
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, I have so many questions for you now.
Please.
So how many times did it go off like a day? Like roughly how many times were you being cued?
So I do it once per week. And the aim is to get 6 beeps. So that's 6 experience samples.
Yeah.
And then a crucial part of the process that I didn't mention there is that I will then go on a call for an hour with Russ and he'll go through every single beep with me. And the idea is that even what I'll write down won't be a very accurate description of my experience.
Yeah.
And you really need a third party to say, okay, you think you were thinking to yourself. Like what words were you thinking? Did you see the words? Where were they? Where were they? And so often one of the big findings was I'd very often think I had inner speech. And then when I got on the call with Russ, he'd be like, well, what words were you thinking exactly? And I'd be thinking back and I'd be like, actually, I wasn't actually inner speaking. I was just thinking. And there's actually a very distinct nuanced difference between thinking and inner speaking. Whereas when you think, you sort of think in concepts that I might think, I want to pet that cat. If I was inner speaking, I would actually say the words, I want to pet that cat in my head. But if I was thinking, it could be replaced with, I want to cuddle that cat, or I want to go over to that cat. So there's a concept there that I was thinking about. So you often think you're thinking in language, but you're actually not. You're not, or you often think you're inner speaking, but you're actually not. So this is one thing that I am learning through the experiences, that I don't inner speak anywhere near as I thought I did. I sometimes do. I definitely sometimes do, and not everyone does. But I don't as often as I think I do.
Yeah,
or as I thought I did in the past.
So one thing that I'd maybe add to that as well, which is also a core part of nervous system mastery, is differentiating between a story / thought, kind of what you're describing, like inner thinking, inner speaking, a sensation, and an emotion.
Yes.
So the thought, fairly self-explanatory. The difference between sensations and emotions is really key, because let's say excitement and fear, the sensations can be very, very similar, except maybe with fear, there's just a little bit more contraction. And once you learn to kind of tease out the story, sensation, and emotion, again, there's actually more agency there as well, because you realize, and this is also has been kind of shown by Lisa Feldman Barrett and other neuroscientists, with that emotions are basically sensations plus context. That we are making these real-time predictions on the fly based on our sensory input. And if we
Yes.
can notice what the original sensory input is, there is more ability to reframe the context and the meaning
Yes.
of what it has.
Yeah, I love that. I loved her work. I fell in love with her work. If anyone hasn't read How Emotions Are Made, it's in depth, it's complex, but it's such a good book, and it's so detailed. One of the really good takeaways I got from her book is I train for triathlon. I love endurance sport, and when I'm out running and every part of me is telling me, right, you need to stop, what I've started doing is recategorizing that feeling of fatigue as a feeling of progression, as a feeling of like, oh, this is where the stimulus is coming from. This is the hypertrophy growth happening right now. And it's crazy the impact you can have on your physiology with that recategorization, with that relabeling. There's even studies out of Harvard in public speaking. I'm sure you're familiar with them, where if people recategorize their feelings of anxiety before a speech as like enthusiasm, as they're ready for the challenge, they can improve their performance in the public speaking. And all it really takes, I don't want to say all because it's not trivial being able to do this. It does take time and it does take practice in relabeling, but same sensation, different physiological effect.
Yep.
I think it's one of the most practical takeaways you can get from hard biology and hard neuroscience is that the interoceptive signals your body sends you, you have to listen to them, but your first interpretation might not always be correct. And I think oftentimes it's not.
Yeah, totally. And one other piece around interoception I want to mention is around decision making. So, kind of going back to like former Jonny startup mode, I would make all of my decisions, what I thought was like rational, intellectually, just like logical from my brain. But in the last 5-10 years, I've been much more like, yes, listening to like whatever the thoughts and stories are, but also dropping in and just the prompt of, does this feel expansive or does this feel like contracting, has been a really helpful kind of like signal for me. And if I feel contracted around it in some way, that's almost always a sign that there is something that my subconscious has picked up on that hasn't made its way into my kind of logical decision making. And almost always without fail, if there's some kind of contraction, then there's like either something that I haven't thought about or something I'm discounting, or there's an emotion there for me to feel through so that I can make a clean decision.
Really cool. Do you have a practice for that? Have you developed a body scanning technique, or is it just something that you've become so strong at now that when something happens, it's about that reflection? You're able to take that 2-3 minutes reflection, scanning the body, seeing where it's expansion or contracting, and then you're able to make that call. Have you sort of developed a practice around it, or has it just become rudimentary for you now?
It has become rudimentary now. I think when in the beginning there was a practice, and the other interesting thing about interoception is it's much easier to pay attention to the signals when there's less adrenaline and cortisol in your system. So after, let's say, an NSDR practice, you will be much more attuned to what's happening, to that kind of subtle contraction or expansion, versus if you're just like, you've just answered 50 emails. So choosing the time of day and maybe doing some kind of downshift practice before will just make it easier to notice. And yeah, for me, it's like, I do this now sometimes. If someone like asks if I want to do a podcast, I'll just kind of like drop in and like, okay, how does this feel? Yeah. And then just make a decision like that. It's pretty quick. And I think most people, you can overthink it, but you probably know, like trust your impulse, I would say.
Yes. How much work or research have you done around flow? I'm really interested in this idea of central nervous system stability and optimization for flow, which I think is such a fundamental aspect of humanity. I mean, you brought up surfing. I think surfing is one of the best flow activities you can do in terms of just dropping you I haven't surfed in a while, but I know that when you're catching that wave, it's like nothing else exists, right? It's like you, the board, and the wave, and sometimes those even converge together into one, and you're not thinking about your taxes, like you're all in your flow.
Yeah.
And I think some of that flow research has come up with people that have really balanced central nervous systems, and they have a really good control on that, are able to drop themselves into flow more readily and more easily than people that perhaps don't. Have you looked into this or seen anything around this?
Yeah, I've actually bookmarked it as something to dig into more deeply. I did read, Jamie Will and Stephen Kotler's books back in the day. My sense is that flow is actually more intimately connected with subtle clenching in the body. And there's a guy called Michael Johnson, who I think would actually make a fantastic guest on your podcast. Who, yeah, you're nodding your head. He has this theory of vasocomputation, and I haven't talked to him about flow specifically, but my sense is that the less contracted you are, the easier it would be to get into a flow state. And there are obviously things that you can do to kind of like hack the flow state, like increasing challenge level and stakes and things like that Jamie and Stephen talk about. But I'm more interested in, so currently my meditation practice, I think of as almost like an unclenching practice, where I'll scan my body and I'll notice parts in the body where there's like subtle or really obvious tension, and I'll just see if I can kind of drop into and relax into it. And if I do this enough and I kind of move my awareness up and down and around, eventually there is this experience of just like expansive. It is kind of like flow. It's actually a similar feeling to what I get when I'm riding down a 10-foot wave with just less adrenaline. Like there's less sympathetic activation, but there's a similar degree of presence and a dropping away of the sense of self, which is one of the key flow kind of classic signs.
So what do you think this contracting is? Is this some bodily manifestation of doubt, of lack of safety or insecurity, uncertainty, and then the body is manifesting that somehow because the brain and body is really one system. There isn't much divide between them. Do you think that's what it is, that when we feel something like that in our body, it is something in the brain manifesting as a lack of safety, doubt, uncertainty, something like that?
Yeah, so borrowing from Mike's work, and I might butcher it here. If I do, I apologize, but from my understanding, this is going to get a little bit into the weeds. We'll see what happens. But Mike believes there are essentially millions of what he calls vascular addressable units. And he thinks that the nervous system and the human body and brain use the vascular system to basically make predictions about the world. So the way that we do predictive processing is through these very subtle or not subtle kind of clenches with the vascular system. And there's a property of the smooth muscle tissue, which means that so if the body is holding a clench for a long period of time, that's using ATP. It's kind of using energy, and so it's able to basically latch that clench that's basically like a cheaper prediction. So a good example might be if you're walking along and you see let's say you get bitten by a snake. And then
I hate snakes.
They're everywhere here in Costa Rica. And then 2 days later, you're walking along the road, you see a rope on the ground, you will like tense, contract, and like jump back. That is because there's been a latch created in your system where it's like this approximate shape equals like like run away.
Yes.
And so what Mike believes is that these clenches are basically predictive processing at work, the way that the body will create predictions about the world. So his theory is vasocomputation, this idea that we are this like biological computer in a way. And what my experience is that the less clenched we are, the more almost like optionality there is, and the more kind of possible permutations there are. Because typically the body is prioritizing predictions that will lead to safety. And so if we feel chronically unsafe, there will be a lot of clenches and latches and contractions in the vascular system, which also interestingly reduce blood flow to those areas, which mean that people who've had a lot of trauma, especially early in their life, they will have very low interoception. And my sense is that that's because they have so many latches in their body that the blood flow actually isn't going to some of these areas, which is why they have low interoception, and also why chronic illnesses and diseases and things tend to happen as well, I think, because the blood just isn't going to some of those areas.
Yes.
That's way more speculative. That's just like
it's so interesting. I mean, Michael Levin's work is so expansive that it's very hard to. I hadn't even heard of that from him. It's so hard to get a grasp on.
This is Michael Johnson.
Sorry, Michael Johnson. Okay, makes sense.
Two Michaels. Yeah. Levin is also like they're actually quite. I think their work
that sounds like it could be his work as well. He does. Yeah, so cool. I resonate with that a lot. I've been lucky enough, I think, to always have a very positive disposition. I've just never really been depressed. I've had some physical health issues in the past. I had some heart problems, but I never really suffered a lot of anxiety, depression. And at the same time, I've always felt a very strong and positive relationship with my body. Mm. And I've been sort of throughout my life, always been able to find my body in moments of difficulty. Even so, when I went through the burnout with my startup, and I'd say things were at an all-time uncertainty, mm-hmm. I was able to just double down and focus on my physical body. And that's just what made sense. I was like, okay, your life's uncertain here. What can you focus on where you can have 100% certainty that you're in the right direction? Mm-hmm. It's just like working on your physical body. And I say physical body, I think physical and mental, there's really no divide between them. I think some exercises hit one more than the other, but I really do think of it as one system. And that really worked for me. And the better my life gets in the moments where I'm most grateful is when I really feel that richness and that connection with my body. Mm-hmm. And when I'm sick, I feel completely disconnected from my body. Mm-hmm. So like I was sick there for like 10 days on the lead up to a triathlon that I was training for. And in the 8 weeks training for the triathlon, I was like, I'm going to kill this thing. I'm going to nail it. I'm going to absolutely destroy it. Mm-hmm. And then I get sick and I'm like, I couldn't possibly do a triathlon like this with this body, like this lousy, pathetic body. Like I don't even feel connected to this, but there's no way I'm going to do it. So it's so interesting that that's also, I think, a symptom of like sickness behavior when your immune system is down regulating everything, that you just don't feel. I had no level of interoception. I had no level of connection with my body at all. So it's interesting. I didn't know that people that suffer trauma have less interoceptive signals. It all makes complete sense. That's really interesting. I hadn't pieced that
similar
together.
With autism and ADHD and other neurodivergence. Typically, there's lower levels of interoception as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things come to mind there. One is around sickness. Like for a long time, whenever I get sick, I'd also be kind of like disconnected from and I'd be curious, like, why is my interoception lower? And what I realized for myself is that I was terrified of feeling helpless. I'd actually created a startup and like constructed an identity around having high agency, which was great, but also there was this fear of helplessness in the background. And so that was something that once I was able to notice that and observe that, I could then learn to like welcome and feel through some of the helplessness, which counterintuitively, although it sounds weird, leads to more freedom. And then the other piece I was going to mention, so around the kind of brain-body connection. So when you do those little kind of the beep check-ins of like, what's the thought that's coming up? Something that I've noticed in meditation is that every time there's a Velcro thought or like a thought that happens more than once, there's almost always a physical correlation somewhere in the body. And it's really interesting to track, okay, when this thought or this phrase appears, is like where does that arise in my body? Because there always is a corresponding like felt sense if you're quiet. I was only able to notice this in the beginning through a 10-day meditation retreat. Like I had to be like so quiet and silent and just remove all the stimulus. But with practice, you can definitely make that correlation. And I like to work with the physical thing because I find it easier to just like bring my awareness there and relax that. But you can also work with whatever the thought is too and kind of unwind something that way as well.
That's really interesting to me. How do you think someone could make progress on doing that and practice that? because that's something that I could definitely see a lot of benefit in my life. I don't think I've been able to make that connection that you say, that a recurring thought pattern that might come up where that's represented in the body. I don't think I've ever made that connection, but something that would certainly be valuable for me.
Yeah, well, a number of ways. I mean, you could either do it during an NSDR practice because you're already scanning your body. If you notice a thought, just track of like, oh, what do I notice in my body? And you'll already be somewhat quiet and still, so it'll be easier. The other thing would be to do a version of what you've been doing, but as well as writing down the word, just write down like solar plexus, or write down like tightness in gut, or write down like tight jaw, stuff like that.
I do that that is part of experience sampling. So I do in that moment. It's not just what I'm thinking, but a lot of it, at least for me specifically, is actually my body. So again,
Cool.
It kind of comes back to
I
do
guess
have a
then you could map the two of like,
right.
When this happened, does this also arise at the same time? Maybe you could upload your journal history into ChatGPT and be like, what are some correlations happening here?
True, actually, we have 8 hours of recordings of this as well, which would probably be quite boring to listen to. But I could. I've written notes for all of them. That's a good idea. I could throw it into ChatGPT and see if it comes up with any patterns or anything that I'm missing.
Yeah,
it really does require moments of stillness, though, right? Because if I'm running for a bus and I have that thought, there's just too much other shit going on for me to make any connection with the body. Totally, my right leg already hurts because I'm sprinting for this bus. My heart's pounding at 170 beats per minute. Like, there's no way I'll make that connection.
Yeah. So
it requires something in your daily routine to be very still, either meditation or you're just going to sleep, or maybe you're napping. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I don't feel like many people take time out of their day to do that. I know that I'm very busy, basically, 7 a.m. till 11 p.m. And I rarely take 10 minutes to just sit and be still. It's definitely a practice I could be better at.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people are busy, and I like I don't know where this came from, but if you don't have a kind of 20 minutes to meditate, then you probably need 2 hours. And that taking the time for the stillness does just drastically increase your effectiveness with everything else you do during the day. For me, it's easier to kind of have that pause at the beginning and the end of day as like a bookmark. So I will typically wake up, go outside, get some sunlight in my eyes, try and do some kind of movement. Today it was a gym, but it might be a walk or surf or something, and then come back. I've been drinking tea when I kind of sit and meditate / like do the unclenching scanning, and then I begin my day. And that has worked for me for a long time. That kind of combination of like sunlight in the eyes, some form of movement, getting the energy going, and then some kind of like stillness practice.
Yeah. I had like a 30-day meditation streak, but I kind of gamified it too much, and it became like a tick box item.
Yeah.
And then I started getting stressed about not ticking it off. Yeah. And then I found myself in this pattern of like, oh, I'll meditate for 10 minutes so that I can tick it off. And I caught myself doing that. And I was like, okay, I just got zero benefit of that meditation, because I was literally just sitting there waiting for the timer to be over. And then afterwards I was like, this is ridiculous. Like I'm now doing this, like the tick box has become a master over me, and I'm its slave. You know, you're not getting the mindfulness benefit of a meditation if you're just doing it to tick the box. And I can struggle with that as well. When I have my tasks, they become the most important. The things in the periphery sort of drift away unless I make them a tick box exercise, and then the tick box exercise in of itself becomes a malicious loop. And I don't know, have you seen that? I mean, like, do you have any good
100%. I mean, so I'm less of a fan of mindfulness meditation. Like, sure, it has its benefits, but I think there's much more effective practices out there. One that I direct people to is it's called Jhana practice, Jhana, and there's a guy called Steven Zerfus, who is a founder of a meditation startup that I think he'd be a great future guest. I can connect you guys, but the practice is basically creating a positive feedback loop between emotion and attention. So you think of something that feels good. Maybe it's like like your puppy, or like the face of someone you love, and that evokes a positive quality. Then you introspectively notice how that feels, and that creates a positive feedback loop between attention and emotion. And he describes it as like a panic attack for joy. And it's unbelievably powerful. And there's 8 jhana states you can get into that are essentially, the felt sense is as powerful as like a high dose of MDMA without any kind of substance. In sometimes as little as like
pretty powerful
15 to 20 minutes. It's almost like a trapdoor in consciousness. It's unreal.
Wow.
And the reason why I bring this up is because when you have access to a practice like that, it doesn't become a box ticking exercise because you're like, I cannot wait to sit down and meditate and feel this good. And I know how much of an impact it's going to have on the rest of my day.
Interesting. And do you do that? Do you do that daily?
Sort of a so I
that?
did. I've done a couple of retreats with them, and it is helpful to do like a kind of like intensive 5 to 7 day thing in the beginning to kind of build up momentum and understand the practice. But you can also do it gradually. And yeah, I've been doing my practice now as a combination of that with the unclenching, which is actually very similar because again, the more like once you build up that kind of initial positive feeling, then the game is noticing the ways in which you're tensing. And sometimes it's actually vulnerable or scary to feel that good. We tense against joy. We tense against compliments. We tense against feeling really great because we're afraid it's not going to last. And so part of it is noticing where you tense and then you relax and it's, oh, I feel even better. And it just kind of keeps building. And it's amazing. And I like, part of me wishes that like, if that was the default approach to meditation, as opposed to like tracking your breath or counting a mantra or something that most people do, I really think the world would be a better place. And then the second interesting thing I'll mention about jhanas, sorry, I'm getting fired up here, but there's a way in which you can become what's known as like jhana blocked. And what this basically, I have this sometimes where I meditate and I find it really hard to get back into that state. And that for me is usually a great signal that there's some emotion that I'm not feeling. Maybe someone said something to me a couple of days ago that I just didn't notice, but it's still in my system. And so my system is kind of like more tense than it would be usually. And so it's harder for me to access this like much more open, joyful, receptive state. So yeah, I would highly recommend, I mean, I can connect you with Stephen, but it's such
that sounds fascinating. That seems a lot more appealing to me, honestly, because I was just kind of starting to think that meditation's not for me. Like
right.
I get a
so
lot
many
of
people say that.
Yeah, and I think like long distance, like running and swimming, feel meditative for me. I know it might sound weird for some people. Like I do other things which I think feel meditative, but that sounds way more up my street. I don't think I'd ever heard of it before. Yeah. That's very interesting.
I do long distance swimming and surfing, and like I'm very familiar with a flow state, and this is very different to that. I will say. Yeah,
very, very cool. I'll give it a try, man. I'll let you know how I go. That sounds really interesting.
Cool.
Another area that I wanted to go is you've mentioned psychedelics a few times.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the role of psychedelics is in maintaining, regulating the nervous system of somebody whose life is maybe going in a good direction? They're happy with things. Mm-hmm. Like how should they think about their use or not use or relationship with different psychedelics?
How many hours do we have to?
As long as you want. I'm enjoying this too much, Jonny.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So let's see, I'll try and be efficient in the way I talk about this. So I think psychedelic has several roles to play. For me, in the beginning, it opened me up to a sense of, again, like humility. It was like humbling of like, I had this experience and I was like, okay, the kind of like materialist, rationalist, like atheist perspective that I had, like it doesn't quite capture what I just experienced. And it created curiosity. It created like, okay, I don't really know. Like there's more going on here. And so I think for a lot of people, having that initial experience and sometimes also feeling the depths of aliveness and intense joy and like ecstatic experiences that people have, it really kind of increases the spectrum of felt sense experience that people weren't even aware of. It kind of like opens up the aperture temporarily. And Sam Harris actually writes about this. It was actually Sam Harris's book, I think, Waking Up, back in the day, that got me curious about psychedelics. And he said, I remember this line. He said something like, "If my daughter doesn't have a psychedelic experience at least once in her life, I would think that she had missed out on a like fundamental human experience."
Right.
And I was like, "Whoa, that's a like, especially for your daughter, that's a big statement." And that got me curious. I then I kind of spent several years exploring, as I mentioned, breath work. I primarily explored ayahuasca, psilocybin, and then later MDMA and ketamine. For me, like, I wouldn't recommend psychedelics to anyone, but I do think that from a kind of therapeutic and quality of life enhancing perspective, which is kind of the question that you asked, guided MDMA sessions can be incredibly powerful because, as I mentioned earlier, it increases your capacity to welcome and feel things which previously would have been too scary. And to give two concrete examples. One, my wife and I did a journey together, and that was when we decided to have kids. Like, she had been a no to having kids all her life, and in this state, something opened up where she was like, "Oh, actually, It feels right. Like, this feels like what I want to do." And that was kind of, and now she's pregnant. And that was kind of like thank you. That was kind of the opening of that door. And
that's awesome. Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. And then with ketamine, the other thing I was going to mention is doing MDMA journeys again with a skilled guide, and I think that's a really important piece to include, is having someone who can it's called like hold space. It basically create a safe space for you to guide. Often there'll be music as well, maybe there's prompts, having sufficient preparation and integration. I interviewed Marcella, who ran the MAPS MDMA trials, and she, in her view, the journey itself was about a third of the benefit. The preparation was a third, the integration was a third. So really don't skip the preparation and integration, which a lot of people do. And I mean, I've had dozens of experiences at this point. Some of the most powerful have been, I remember one journey where I had like a tightness in my psoas, and a lot of people have like tightness in kind of pelvic region. And I went back to a memory where I was basically like left alone to cry in a cot. And I kind of felt this like deep existential like abandonment and like aloneness that I'd been carrying, and felt through that, like kind of like released that. And at the same time, this enormous amount of tension just vanished from my psoas area.
Wow.
And my HRV was 30% higher for the next like year.
Wow.
Like wild, absolutely wild.
That's stunning.
And then, and the final thing I mentioned on ketamine, which is also, I mean, there's a legality component to this as well. Ketamine is much easier to access legally. I will say ketamine is more dangerous from a kind of addictive kind of perspective. So there's real risks there. But if you're doing it,
toxicity issues as well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're doing it in a guided setting with appropriate dosing, I've spent a number of journeys doing it with bodywork and craniosacral practice, which has had a remarkable effect. And this is just kind of low doses of ketamine as well. And what I find is that I think it allows the latches to open more easily. And a way that, a way I can maybe make this tangible. If you're having like a deep tissue massage and someone kind of pushes in on a trigger point, your body will like tense against it. You're like no. But the low dose ketamine kind of allows it to like, you can go deeper without feeling the kind of the clenching and the pushing against. So it almost just kind of opens up and massages the system a little bit. And I was working with this guy in his late 70s called Fred on the west coast of California. And just some of the most profound experiences of my life have come through the combination of skilled body work with ketamine. So I'm, as you can probably tell, I'm like, there are huge, I think, life-changing benefits that people can have from this. There are also enormous risks, contraindications, people that probably should avoid, or at least start with somatic therapy in the beginning and go really gently. And I think, while we're talking about it, particularly with ayahuasca, there is enormous, like, I would say 95% of the people who are serving it today probably shouldn't be. Like it takes decades of training and nuance and skill to really create those spaces skillfully. And I think a lot of people doing it out there just don't have the skill. So really being incredibly discerning with who you trust, especially with something like ayahuasca, and still with any substance really. Um, yeah, I'll pause. I've been speaking
Powerful
for.
stuff. No, great stories. I mean, powerful stuff. I've I don't know if I have any maybe individual stories as powerful, as poignant as you said there, but I definitely get a reinvigorated sense that to get out of like the rat race, any sense
Mm,
of what my expectations are from other people.
mm,
You know, one of the things that psychedelics do, and in my case, I'm talking about LSD, is it relaxes the priors. It relaxes your priors, and you can get into a very technical sense of what that is. It has a predictive processing meaning, and but it basically, I think, a way you can understand is like the boundary constraints that you place or are automatically placed on your life that you don't
mm,
realize are placed there.
mhm,
And a lot of that is expectations from your social group, expectations from your culture, from your just the reality and environment that you live in. And through some of my trips, just what I've gotten it consistently is just all of that just disintegrates.
mhm,
Any sense of like, oh, my friend just got a raise and is now making six figures and I'm still struggling in my business. Any sense of jealousy, squashed, just obliterated, destroyed and it gives you a sense of I'm on my own path
mm,
and it might be slower, but comparisons don't make any sense.
mhm,
I mean, the comparison to my friend who's working a corporate job and making six figures makes absolutely no sense with what life journey I'm on.
mhm,
And I think that can be really hard to see if you haven't done psychedelics. A lot of those doubts can take over. You know, what are my friends doing? What do my parents expect me to do? What does my culture expect me to do?
mm,
But when you have these trips, at least for me, I'm like, none of that matters. That's all zero. What
mm,
appeals to me is telling amazing neuroscience stories and talking about biology and talking about the fact that we're an ensemble of 100 trillion conscious cells and somehow they all come together to make Evan. And that just electrifies me. I'm like, that's
mhm,
so cool.
mhm.
So it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. It doesn't matter that those expectations aren't matched because that's my mission. That's my path.
Yeah, I love that. Love that.
And if I ever have those doubts or see them cropping up, I might consider doing tripping either by myself or with people.
Mhm,
And I almost always get that renewed sense of it might take longer. It's going to be painful. There's going to be more variance of investors kicking you in the balls, but what you're building is
mm,
worth it.
mm.
And I think that's so powerful. And I would agree with Sam Harris that it does feel like a unique experience in of itself. Like nothing else can really match that feeling.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. Two things I'll add to that. One is my version of what you described was I spent a lot of time kind of questioning basically like what is the meaning of life? Like some variants on that question. And in some of the deeper psychedelic states, asking that question felt like ridiculous. It was like it's inherently meaning. There are certain states of being, states of the nervous system, which feel deeply meaningful. And so the question isn't, it's not like a problem to be solved, which is the way I'd been orienting towards it, and more of just like, it's a state to access. And sometimes you forget that. And then the question is like, how do I get back into that state? Which is partly why the nervous system became fascinating for me. And then, oh yeah, the other loop I wanted to connect was that the priors that you mentioned, like Mike Johnson would basically say those priors are latches and clenches,
Mm.
basically the same thing. And so the LSD will just it's like a rapid latch opener. It will ping open all of your latches. And then the question in my mind is how do you safely, gradually, and sustainably open those latches permanently? Because eventually the LSD wears off and they reclose. And so the interesting journey is how do you negotiate with the nervous system to get it to make different predictions than the ones that it has.
Right. I had never that's such a eye opener for me because I'll always get urges to like stretch and to
Yep,
move my body,
totally.
to like to start like, you know,
The
bending my
yawn.
fingers and apply tension and all of that. But I've never been cognizant of that. I've always noticed it's there and I'll do it. I'll get the yoga mat out and I'll feel great, but I've never tried to make any connections between the cognitive and the bodily.
Yeah.
I've never tried to unify them.
You'll
Now
probably be able to
you've got
stretch.
a new.
Like I noticed that I can touch my toes like way more when I'm in a psychedelic state because I think there's less of that protective latching. There's less clenching.
Mm. You've given me a plan now. This is something that I'm gonna be bent into a croissant on my terrace, just just like skies moving around me, trees. It's just gonna be so fun. That's such an interesting one. I wonder how deep it could go once you really bring in the body, because I think I've always treated them as separate things. Like I have a desire to stretch and move my body, and I have all these thoughts going on upstairs, but I've never tried to tie them together, and I really wonder
It makes
is that where
it makes a huge difference. So I've done this is more with psilocybin, but doing like a long yoga session with some like yin stretching, and then lying down in like a super relaxed state. Even taking a low dose, I like dropped so deep, like way deeper
yes.
than I've gone with like 5, 6, 7 grams. Yeah,
I think I need to. If this is what's happening in Costa Rica, I think I need to move out there. If this is the vibe,
actually less. Funnily enough, less here. This is more in.
Oh, is it okay?
Yeah, more like Boulder and Santa Cruz days. Yeah.
How would you, if you were in government and setting policy on psychedelics,
Oh,
how
Jesus.
would, I'm always curious in this question how people would legislate them. Like how do you even think about that broadly? How we should be dealing, distributing, selling psychedelics?
Yeah, well, I'm like most people. I think decriminalization is a dumb idea. I think psychedelics are very different from like quote unquote drugs, like entheogens. It's just a fundamentally different category.
Yeah.
I think education really is probably the biggest thing that's required, and re-education to kind of undo some of the damage done by the governments in the 70s and 80s, and like the war against drugs and all those types of things.
Yes.
Because they certainly can be harmful if taken in inappropriate settings. So, like anything, it's like like before you learn to drive a car, you're like, okay, here are some of the risks that you might want to be aware of. But we let people drive cars.
Yeah.
And so education is by far the biggest thing.
I
and I
agree with that.
think,
That's why I like having these conversations.
yeah, and I think also, I'm a fan of what MAPS are doing in the therapeutic model, but I also think that, traditionally these entheogens have been ingested in community and in kind of group settings. And I think that is also the only way that this will be scalable in any way, because currently psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is insanely expensive. It costs
Yeah, I looked this up a while ago. It's like
thousands of dollars.
$1,000 per session or something, right? It's
because
crazy.
it's so many hours of like sometimes 2 or 3 therapists' time that you're paying for, in addition to everything else. So it's actually not even going to be that accessible to most people in the current model. And so I think the only way that it scales is if there are, let's say, like playbooks for creating safe settings, kind of safe, like intentional containers, very well trained practitioners that can kind of like hold a space with deep integrity, and then kind of inviting people that feel curious about it. Yeah, and it also really depends on the intention, because it's very different. Like for me, in the beginning, it was more about like trying to heal and feel certain things, and now it's more out of like reverence, and like in some ways like devotion is a theme that kind of comes up a lot more. It almost feels like a kind of just something that's sacred in my life, something that I deeply look forward to, and feels like I get to access a deeper part of myself through these. So yeah, I mean, it does feel like we're gradually going in the right direction. And I spoke to Dylan, who was the founder of Mindbloom recently. Mindbloom is one of the ketamine startups in the US, and he was saying that big pharma has basically been like attacking his company publishing hit pieces in the Wall Street Journal, trying to discredit what he's doing and trying to, yeah. So I mean, it's messed up. Like the big pharma industry, I think, is.
I have a huge distaste for big pharma at the moment. I just spoke to Dr. Joanna Moncrief about basically the whole story of SSRIs. She's kind of leading a very important, again, educational mission to really teach people who've been taking SSRIs what the actual side effects are, and that we don't know what depression is. We definitely don't know that it's a chemical imbalance created by serotonin.
I mean, that's been discredited, to be honest. Like that's no longer.
But the pharmaceutical companies like actively created marketing campaigns and sunk millions and billions of dollars into, again, advertisement campaigns for psychiatric drugs is just a friggin' weird concept in of itself. But to convince people that what they have is a chemical imbalance of serotonin, and then they have the magic cure for it. And then none of the side effects, which are very large and very expansive and very devastating for people, and even devastating for people after they stop taking the medication.
100%. Yeah.
After that podcast came out, huge advocacy groups reached out to me and were thanking me for the episode. There's, groups of thousands of people who are suffering the side effects of SSRIs 10 years after stopping taking them, which blows my mind. For what might have been just a standard dose of anxiety that they were feeling in their life, a natural response to a difficulty in life, and they were said, look, here's medication. Now all you have to do is take it for the next 5 years, instead of like go for a walk or get some sunlight or all the rest. I think big pharma have a serious price to pay to society.
Yeah, I'm so with you, and it's one of the reasons that I'm, my mission in life, I think, is spreading nervous system literacy and giving people the education and the tools and the practices that are way more effective than SSRIs could ever be. Way more empowering, and none of the often pretty negative side effects.
Yeah, I love it, man. We're on a similar mission, and I've absolutely loved talking to you, and this has been so much fun. You're a great communicator. I think the conversation has gone in so many fun places. We've both opened up about things. Such a good conversation. I'm really curious on something that you're really excited about in the next decade, 2 decades. What's in the future that you're just itching to know how it's going to play out? Something that really makes you excited.
Yeah, I'm going to give a bunch of quick answers and then we can double click on any of them. Personally, fatherhood. My wife's pregnant. I'm really excited for that adventure. AI is something I've been thinking a lot about, and just like how to work with AI skillfully and to somewhat prepare for like an increasingly uncertain world. And then in the realm of what we've been talking about, I think honestly the two Michaels, Dr. Michael Levin and Michael Johnson, are the two most interesting kind of theoretical neuroscientists alive today. And I think both of them are kind of on the verge of some very exciting, like radical breakthroughs in their realms. Michael Levin with the kind of bioelectric model and like the potential of being able to understand the bioelectric code and being able to maybe kind of like I could imagine designing interventions which sent bioelectric signals to kind of gradually target certain latches and open them in a kind of sustainable way, and develop basically this like read-write mechanism for latch opening, which currently I know how to do through breath work or somatic work, but it's very much difficult to quantify. It's almost impossible to quantify. And so that's the other thing as well. I'm excited to be able to, and I know some people that are considering working on this, but creating like an fMRI scan for latches. So you could like do a scan and be like, here are all of the areas that your body is currently clenching or carrying tension. And here's a protocol of, let's say, breathwork, MDMA guided journeys, etc., to gradually and safely open up these latches in your system, which I believe would create more aliveness, less reactivity, more joy in people's lives. So I think that area
great answer
is super interesting to me. If I had capacity, I'd probably create a startup that was like building that machine, frankly. As it is, I'm just kind of like speaking to some people that are involved, and I'm thinking about a book proposal around unclenching and around unpacking both, kind of describing Mike's work in a way that's a little bit more accessible and also ties into some of the nervous system stuff as well. So I think that's what's like super exciting for me in that regard.
Great answer, man. Really, really cool. Your story on how the ketamine realization that lifted that tension in your psoas muscle is blowing my mind.
Mm-hmm.
How many people live 50 years of their life or their entire lives with a tension that causes them so much discomfort, but they never realize isn't actually going to be solved in the gym, but is going to be solved in some sort of combination therapy where they're both their body and their mind is at work and they're working together to naggle it out. I don't think this is a topic that's discussed very often, you know, of that even being a possibility. I definitely didn't learn it in my neuroscience degree in college. I'm realizing there's so many things about the brain that I never learned in my degree. But I think it's one of the most fun things about this podcast is like I get to learn so much from people like you about things that I'd never heard of. But I think this is such an interesting idea. You've set my next psychedelic trip. You give me a plan for it, which I'm really excited for. Let's finish off on AI just because I'm really curious on how you're thinking about it. Is there a particular avenue that you have your eye on, particularly that's related to your work that you think is going to have huge disruptive effects? Is there an area that you're really scared of that you think people are not paying enough attention to? Kind of, let's finish by summarizing kind of what you've been thinking about in relation to AI and how that will unravel in the next decade.
Yeah, again, could be multiple hours talking about this.
We'll have a round two. Trust me, you're
great. That
too
sounds
interesting
fun.
a man.
That sounds fun. I'd love that. Well, so I've been thinking about there's a guy Ruben who's an amazing neuroscientist, also a friend. He's published some really fascinating papers on consciousness, but then also like how it informs AI and kind of the overlap between AI and consciousness, which I think is super interesting. From a kind of pragmatic angle, I've been thinking about using, so like even today you can take a photo of your face, upload it to Claude, and have it deconstruct your facial tension to give you pretty precise insights about your big five personality, about emotions you habitually avoid, around micro experiments you can run.
True?
Yeah, I've done this with about 20 friends, and it's bizarrely accurate. Even you can
just
do
a picture of your face.
Yep. So it's better if you do like four photos because you get more variation. But and this the prompt that I developed is based on Alexander Lowen and Wilhelm Reich's work around like character armor. I'll send you the prompt afterwards. We'll probably have like a long list of things. But
I need to try this and figure out my unresolved traumas from my face.
Well, one thing that I'm thinking about is how so already somatic therapy through just, let's say, like Claude text is already pretty good if you kind of know what you're doing. But although I don't want human connection to ever be replaced, for a large chunk of people for whom therapy is too expensive or inaccessible for whatever reason, I think there's a real gap for a well-trained, safe kind of somatic therapeutic AI, which also takes in audio cues, takes in changes in facial tension, basically like what a good coach will pick up on. If you've ever seen Joe Hudson coach, for example, he does this rapid fire coaching, and he'll like he'll like what's the tiny like twitch that no one else would notice. He's like, oh, like what was that? And he'll kind of go into that. And I think that we could probably create like, 1,000 Joe Hudson AI agents in like the next 2 or 3 years. And there are obviously potential there's real safety concerns there, but I think there's real potential for benefit and good, particularly if people are orienting it with this sense of curiosity and looking to learn about themselves. And I think one of the most important things is that they are designed with a sense of, again, coming back to agency, where they are getting us to refer back to our own experience and constantly kind of like reflecting back, as opposed to what some people might do, which is give their authority over to the AI and then create this kind of disempowering, toxic relationship. So I
Yes.
think there's a lot to be said for how, again, educating ourselves for like what is a healthy way to relate to an AI where you're using it in an empowering way, where it's offering insightful reflections as opposed to outsourcing your own agency. I think that's a really important conversation. Yeah, I'll pause there.
We already have a stacked list for round 2. I think all of these topics need at least 20 minutes and 20 questions to deconstruct. And this has been so much fun.
This has been so fun. I don't think I've ever had such a wide-ranging conversation. This has been
it's
so
been great. It really has. I'm gonna be completely honest. This has massively exceeded my expectations. When I dove in, I'm gonna be completely honest. I saw, God, okay, another guy selling a course. Immediately a little bit skeptical of that.
Yeah.
But man, you're seriously the real deal. You know your stuff. You're a great communicator. Your story is powerful. This has been an amazing conversation. It's exceeded all of my expectations, and I'm so excited to have you on for round 2. I think we could collaborate on businesses or content in the future, or loads of different things. What a conversation, man. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, Jonny.
Yeah, man. Me too. I've loved it. I'll send you an email with a ton of links and resources and rabbit holes to dive in, and I'd be so down for round 2 sometime as well.
Incredible, man. If you made it this far, then you must at least partially be interested in brain science, and who can blame you? It is the most interesting topic in the world. Twice per week, I talk to the most amazing neuroscientists in the entire world. So if you're interested, then subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below who you'd like me to speak to next, and thank you so much for your ongoing support.